George Hegel's Philosophy of Mind, Part 1, Subjective Mind, Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist, Supersection A, Theoretical Mind, Supra-subsection Alpha, Intuition, Intelligent Perception, An, Swung, Infrasection 2, Encyclopedia section 448. As this immediate finding is broken up into elements, we have the one factor in attention, the abstract identical direction of mind in feeling, as also in all other more advanced developments of it. An act of self-collection, the factor of fixing it as our own, but with an as yet only nominal autonomy of intelligence. Apart from such attention, there is nothing for the mind. The other factor is to invest the special quality of feeling, as contrasted with this inwardness of mind, with the character of something existent, but as a negative or as the abstract otherness of itself. Intelligence thus defines the content of sensation as something that is out of itself, projects it into time and space, which are the forms in which it is intuitive. To the view of consciousness, the material is only an object of consciousness, a relative other. From mind, it receives the rational characteristic of being its very other. See sections 147 and 254, paragraph. Please see Encyclopedia sections 147 and 254 for further information. Encyclopedia section 449, infrasection 3. When intelligence reaches a concrete unity of two factors, that is to say, when it is at once self-collected in this externally existing material, and yet in this self-collectedness sunk in the out-of-selfness, it is intuition or mental vision. Encyclopedia section 450. At and towards this its own out-of-selfness, intelligence no less essentially directs its attention. In this its immediacy it is an awakening to itself, a recollection of itself. Thus intuition becomes a consecration. Thus intuition becomes a concretion of the material with the intelligence, which makes it its own, so that it no longer needs this immediacy, no longer needs to find the content. Hegel's Philosophy of Mind, Part 1, Subjective Mind, Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist, Supersection A, Theoretical Mind, Subsection Beta. Representation or mental idea. Vorstellung. Vorstellung. Encyclopedia section 451. Representation is this, recollected or inwardized intuition, and as such is the middle between the stage of intelligence where it finds itself immediately subject to modification and that where intelligence is in its freedom or as thought. The representation is the property of intelligence with a preponderating subjectivity, however, as its right of property is still conditioned by contrast with the immediacy, and the representation cannot, as it stands, be said to be. The path of intelligence. The representation is the property of intelligence, with a preponderating subjectivity, however, as its right of property is still conditioned by contrast with the immediacy, and the representation cannot, as it stands, be said to be. Al-Mahayal. The path of intelligence in representations is to render the immediacy inward, to invest itself with intuitive action in itself, and at the same time to get rid of the subjectivity of the inwardness and inwardly divest itself of it, so as to be in itself in an externality of its own. But as representation begins from intuition and the ready found material of intuition, the institutional contrast still continues to affect its activity and makes its concrete products still syntheses, which do not grow to the concrete immanence of the notion till they reach the stage of thought. Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist. Supersection A, Theoretical Mind. Supra subsection Beta, Representation or Mental Idea. Vorstellung. Metasection Alpha Alpha, Recollection. De Erinnerung. Encyclopedia section 452. Intelligence, as it at first recollects the intuition, places the content of feeling in its own inwardness, in a space and a time of its own. In this way, that content is 1. Infrasection 1. An image or picture liberated from its original immediacy and abstract singleness amongst other things, and received into the universality of the ego. The image loses the full complement of features proper to intuition and is arbitrary or contingent, isolated, we may say, from the external place, time, and immediate context in which the intuition stood. Infrasection 2, Encyclopedia section 453. The image is of itself transient, and intelligence itself is as attention, its time and also its place, its when and where. But intelligence is not only consciousness and actual existence, but qua intelligence is the subject and the potentiality of its own specializations. The image, when thus kept in mind, is no longer existent, but stored up out of consciousness. To grasp intelligence as this might, to grasp intelligence as this night-like mine, or pit in which is stored a world of infinitely many images and representations, yet without being in consciousness, is from the one point of view the universal postulate which bids us treat the notion as concrete, in the way we treat, ergo, the germ as affirmatively containing, in virtual possibility, all the qualities that come into existence in the subsequent development of the tree. inability to grasp a universal like this, which, though intrinsically concrete, still continues simple, is what has led people to talk about special fibers and areas as receptacles of particular ideas. It was felt that what was diverse should, in the nature of things, have a local habitation peculiar to itself. But whereas the reversion of the germ from its existing specializations to its simplicity in a purely potential existence takes place only in another germ, the germ of the fruit, intelligence qua intelligence shows the potential coming to free existence in its development, and yet at the same time collecting itself in its inwardness. Hence, from the other point of view, intelligence is to be conceived as the subconscious mind, in essence, an existent universal in which the difference has not yet been realized in its separations. And it is indeed this potentiality which is the first form of universality offered in mental representation. And for section 3, Encyclopedia section 454, an image thus abstractly treasured up needs. An image thus abstractly treasured up needs, if it is to exist, an actual intuition. And what is strictly called remembrance is the reference of the image to an intuition, and that as a subsummation. An image thus abstractly treasured up needs, if it is to exist, an actual intuition. And what is strictly called remembrance, mantra, vikr, rosary, is the reference of the image to an intuition, and that as a subsumption of the immediate single intuition, impression, under what is in point of form universal, under the representation idea with the same content. Thus, intelligence recognizes the specific sensation and the intuition of it as what is already its own. In them, it is still within itself. At the same time, it is aware that what is only its primarily internal image is also an immediate object of intuition by which it is authenticated. The image which in the mind, the image which in the mind of intelligence was only its property, now that it has been endued with externality, comes actually into possession. And so the image is at once rendered distinguishable from the intuition and separable from the blank night in which it was originally submerged. Intelligence is thus the force which can give forth its property and dispense with external intuition for its existence in it. This synthesis of the internal image with the recollected existence is representation proper. By this synthesis, the internal now has the qualification of being able to be presented before intelligence and to have its existence in it. Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist. Supersection A, Theoretical Mind. Supersection Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist. Supersection A, Theoretical Mind. Subsection B, Representation or Mental Idea. And that's subsection beta, pardon. Part 1, Subjective Mind. Subsection C, psychology, mind, der Geist. Supersection A, theoretical mind. Supersubsection beta, representation or mental idea. Vorstellung. Metasection alpha alpha, recollection. Die Erinnerung. And now we're moving on to metasection beta beta, imagination. Die Einbildungskraft. Einbildungskraft. And for section 1, Encyclopedia section 455. The intelligence which is active in this possession is the reproductive imagination, where the images issue from the inward world belonging to the ego, which is now the power over them. The images are in the first instance referred to this external, immediate time and space, which is treasured up along with them. But it is solely in the conscious subject, where it is treasured up, that the image has the individuality in which the features composing it are conjoined. Whereas the original concretion, in essence, at first only in space and time, as a unit of intuition, has been broken up. The content reproduced, belonging as it does to the self identical unity of intelligence, and an output from its universal mind, has a general idea representation to supply the link of association for the images which, according to circumstances, are more abstract or more concrete ideas. The so called laws of the association of ideas were objects of great interest, especially during the outburst of empirical psychology, which was contemporaneous with the decline of philosophy. In the first place, it is not ideas, properly so called, which are associated. Secondly, these modes of relation are not laws, just for the reason that there are so many laws about the same thing, as to suggest a caprice and a contingency opposed to the very nature of law. It is a matter of chance whether the link of association is something pictorial. It is a matter of chance whether the link of association is something pictorial or an intellectual category such as likeness, kamithlihi, and contrast, reason and correspondence, such as likeness and contrast, reason and consequence, the train of images and representations suggested by association is the sport of vacant minded ideation, where, though intelligence shows itself by a certain formal universality, the matter is entirely pictorial. Images and idea, image and idea, if we leave out of account the more precise definition of those forms given above, present also a distinction in content. The former is the more consciously concrete idea, whereas the idea representation, whatever be its content, from image, notion, or idea, has always the peculiarity, though belonging to intelligence, of being in respect of its content given and immediate. It is still true of this idea or representation, as of all intelligence, that it finds its material, as a matter of fact, to be so and so, and the universality which the aforesaid material receives by ideation is still abstract. Mental representation is the mean in the syllogism of the elevation of intelligence, the link between the two significations of self-relatedness as seen as being and universality, which in consciousness receive the title of object and subject. Intelligence complements what is merely found by the attribution of universality, and the internal and its own by the attribution of being, but a being of its own intuition, on the distinction of representations and thoughts. See Introduction to the Logic, section 20, note. Abstraction, which occurs in the ideational activity by which general ideas are produced, and ideas qua ideas virtually have the form of generality, is frequently explained as the incidence of many similar images one upon another, and is supposed to be thus made intelligible. If this superimposing is to be no mere accident and without principle, a force of attraction and like images must be assumed, or somewhat, or something of the sort. If this superimposing is to be no mere accident and without principle, a force of attraction in like images must be assumed, or something of the sort, which at the same time would have the negative power of rubbing off the dissimilar elements against each other. This force is really intelligence itself, the self identical ego, which by its internalizing recollection gives the images ipso facto generality and subsumes the single intuition under the already internalized image. See section 453. Paragraph section, Encyclopedia section 456. Thus, even the association of ideas is to be treated as a subsumption of the individual under the universal, which forms their connecting link. But here intelligence is more than merely a general form. Its inwardness is an internally definite, concrete subjectivity with a substance and value of its own, derived from some interest, some latent concept of ideal principle, so far as we may by anticipation speak of such. Intelligence is the power which wields the stores of images and ideas belonging to it, and which thus, in per section 2, freely combines and subsumes these stores in obedience to its peculiar tenor. Such is creative imagination, fantasy, symbolic, allegoric, or poetical imagination, where the intelligence gets a definite embodiment in the store of ideas and informs them with its general tone. These more or less concrete, individualized creations are still syntheses for the material in which the subjective principles and ideas get a mentally pictorial existence is derived from the data of intuition. Encyclopedia section 457. In creative imagination, intelligence has been so far perfected as to need no helps from intuition. In creative imagination, intelligence has been so far perfected as to need no helps for intuition. Its self sprung ideas have pictorial existence. This pictorial creation of its intuitive spontaneity is subjective, still lacks the side of existence. But as the creation unites the internal idea with the vehicle of materialization, intelligence has therein implicitly returned both to identical self relation and to immediacy. As reason, it first start as reason, its first start was to appropriate the immediate datum in itself. Encyclopedia sections 445 and 455, in essence, to universalize it. And now its action as reason, Encyclopedia section 458, is from the present point directed towards giving the character of an existence to what in it has been perfected to concrete auto intuition. In other words, it aims at making itself be and be a fact. Acting on this view, it is self uttering, intuition producing, the imagination which creates signs. Productive imagination is the center in which the universal and being, one's own, and what is picked up, internal and external, are completely welded into one. The preceding syntheses of intuition, recollection, and similar things are unification of the same factors, but they are syntheses. It is not till creative imagination that intelligence ceases to be the vague mine and the universal and becomes an individuality, a concrete subjectivity in which the self reference is defined both to being and to universality. The creations of imagination are on all hands recognized as such combinations of the mind's own and inward with the matter of intuition. What further and more definite aspects they have is a matter for other departments. For the present, this internal studio of intelligence is only to be looked at in these abstract aspects. Imagination, when regarded as the agency of this unification, is reason, but only a nominal reason, because the matter or theme it embodies is to imagination, qua imagination, a matter of indifference, whilst reason, qua reason, also insists upon the truth of its content. Another point calling for special notice is that when imagination elevates the internal meaning to an image and intuition, and this is expressed by saying that it gives the former the character of an existent, the phrase must not seem surprising that intelligence makes itself be as a thing, for its ideal import is itself, and so is the aspect which it imposes upon it. The image produced by imagination of an object is a bare mental or subjective intuition. In the sign or symbol, it adds intuitability proper, and in mechanical memory, it completes, so far as it is concerned, this form of being. Encyclopedia section 458. In this unity, initiated by intelligence, of an independent representation with an intuition, the matter of the latter is, in first instance, something accepted. Somewhat immediate are given, ergo, the color of the cockade, and such. But in the fusion of the two elements, the intuition does not count positively or as representing itself, but as representative of something else. It is an image which has received as its soul and meaning an independent mental representation. This intuition is the sign. The sign is some immediate intuition. representing a totally different import from what naturally belongs to it. It is the pyramid into which a foreign soul has been conveyed, and where it is conserved. The sign is different from the symbol, for in the symbol, the original characters, in essence and conception, of the visible object are more or less identical with the import which it bears as symbol. Whereas in the sign, strictly so called, the natural attributes of the intuition and the connotation of which it is a sign have nothing to do with each other. Intelligence therefore gives proof of wider choice and ampler authority in the use of intuitions when it treats them as designatory, significative, rather than symbolical. In logic and psychology, signs and language are usually foisted in somewhere as an appendix, without any trouble being taken to display their necessity and systematic place in the economy of intelligence. The right place for the sign is that just given, where intelligence, which as intuiting generates the form of time and space, but is apparently recipient of sensible matter, of out of which it forms ideas, now gives its own original ideas a definite existence from itself, treating the intuition, or time and space, as filled full as its own property, deleting the connotation which properly and naturally belongs to it, and conferring on it an other connotation as its soul and import. This sign creating activity may be distinctively named productive memory, the primarily abstract mnemosine, mnemosine, the primarily abstract mnemosine, Mnemosyne. Since memory, which in ordinary life is often used as interchangeable and synonymous with remembrance, recollection, and even with conception and imagination, has always to do with signs only.